The Senate chamber hushed as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett approached the witness table, her navy blue blazer contrasting sharply with the polished mahogany. C-SPAN cameras captured the tension as she adjusted her microphone, while Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell shuffled papers on the dais above her, not bothering to make eye contact. The Joint Committee hearing on election security had been contentious from the start, but no one expected what happened next. After Crockett presented evidence of voting machine vulnerabilities in her district, McConnell leaned forward with a dismissive smirk. "Congresswoman," he drawled, his voice carrying that distinctive Kentucky cadence, "perhaps instead of manufacturing conspiracy theories about election security, you could focus on the actual problems in your district. The people who elected you might appreciate that more than these theatrical performances." The personal attack, unprecedented in a formal Senate hearing, sent shockwaves through the chamber. Democratic senators exchanged stunned glances while Republican colleagues shifted uncomfortably. For 3 seconds, complete silence filled the ornate room. Then Crockett responded, not with anger, not with indignation, but with something far more powerful. Her measured words caused McConnell's face to drain of color as cameras captured the exact moment he realized he had severely miscalculated. Within minutes, the exchange would be trending nationwide. Before we reveal exactly what happened in this extraordinary confrontation, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful political moments you won't see in mainstream media. Now, let's examine how this remarkable exchange unfolded and why it's sending ripples through Washington. To understand the significance of this clash, we need to examine the trajectories that brought these two political figures to this pivotal moment. At 45, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett represented a new generation of congressional leadership. Before entering politics, she had built an impressive career as an election law attorney, representing clients in voting rights cases across the South. Her legal background gave her rare expertise in the technical aspects of election administration, knowledge that would prove crucial in the confrontation to come. "She knows election systems from the inside out," noted former colleague Marcus Jefferson. Jasmine worked cases involving everything from ballot design to voting machine certification. She can explain the most complex technical vulnerabilities in terms anyone can understand. After winning her congressional seat in a historic upset, Crockett quickly established herself as a substantive voice on the House Administration Committee, which oversees federal elections. Rather than seeking media attention, she had focused on the unglamorous work of election security, holding dozens of field hearings in districts across the country. "What makes Congresswoman Crockett unusual is her methodical approach," explained political analyst Rebecca Torres. "While many representatives use committee hearings for viral moments, she's known for detailed questioning based on technical expertise. She does her homework." This reputation for substantive preparation stood in contrast to the perception of many younger representatives as being more focused on social media presence than legislative details. It had earned her grudging respect even from some across the aisle. Senator Mitch McConnell, at 83, represented an entirely different political era. After 5 decades in Washington and multiple terms as both majority and minority leader, McConnell had shaped the modern Senate through strategic procedural mastery. His unflappable demeanor and tactical discipline had earned him the nickname, the Tortoise, among colleagues. "McConnell rarely makes unforced errors," noted veteran Senate correspondent James Wilson. "His comments are typically measured and strategic." That's what made this particular exchange so extraordinary. It was an uncharacteristic miscalculation from someone known for careful positioning. The Joint Committee hearing had been called to address growing concerns about election infrastructure. Following documented attempts to access voting systems in multiple states, Congress was considering bipartisan legislation to strengthen security protocols and establish federal standards for election equipment. As the House member with the most technical expertise in election systems, Crockett had been invited to testify about vulnerabilities she had documented during field hearings in her district. Her testimony had been scheduled for 30 minutes, but tensions rose when several Republican senators questioned whether the hearing was necessary at all. "This seems like a solution in search of a problem," one senator had commented. "Our elections are already secure." Crockett had responded by methodically presenting evidence. Photographs of outdated voting machines with unpatched software documentation of insufficient security protocols, and testimony from local election officials requesting federal assistance. Her presentation was notably non-partisan, focusing on technical vulnerabilities rather than political implications. "The issues I've documented affect all voters, regardless of party," she emphasized. "Election security shouldn't be a partisan issue." The atmosphere in the chamber shifted perceptibly when she presented data showing that rural counties, which typically vote Republican, actually had the most outdated equipment and were most vulnerable to both technical failures and potential tampering. This information challenged the narrative that election security concerns were merely a Democratic talking point. As Crockett concluded her initial presentation, the committee chair opened the floor for questions. Several senators from both parties engaged constructively, asking detailed follow-ups about specific vulnerabilities and potential solutions. The hearing seemed to be proceeding professionally until McConnell, who rarely participated actively in committee questioning, suddenly leaned toward his microphone. His dismissive comment about manufactured conspiracy theories and suggestion that Crockett was neglecting her district didn't just violate Senate norms of decorum, it revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of who he was dealing with. McConnell had apparently expected a typical partisan exchange. What he got instead would become one of the most discussed moments in recent congressional history. Have you ever witnessed someone completely misjudge the person they were confronting? Share your story in the comments below. We're interested in hearing about moments when someone underestimated you or someone you know. The Senate hearing room, with its ornate ceiling and rich wooden panels, had witnessed countless political confrontations over the decades. But the exchange unfolding now would be remembered as particularly consequential. McConnell's comment hung in the air, the suggestion that Crockett was manufacturing conspiracy theories instead of addressing actual problems in her district. The personal nature of the attack violated the Senate's traditional decorum, particularly toward invited witnesses. Several staffers visibly winced. The committee chairman, Senator James Lankford, shifted uncomfortably. "I'd like to remind all members that we should address the substance of the testimony rather than—" "Mr. Chairman, if I may," Crockett interjected calmly. "I'd like to respond to the minority leader's comment." Lankford nodded, and all eyes turned to Crockett. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in as she straightened the papers before her, her expression composed but determined. Those who knew her recognized the slight squaring of her shoulders, a courtroom attorney preparing to present evidence. "Senator McConnell," she began, her voice measured and clear, "I appreciate your concern for my district. Allow me to address both aspects of your comment directly." She reached into her folder and removed several photographs. "These images aren't manufactured conspiracy theories. They are documented vulnerabilities in voting systems currently deployed across 14 states, including Kentucky." The gallery stirred at the mention of McConnell's home state. Crockett continued, "This first image shows a voting machine from Pike County, Kentucky, still running software that hasn't been updated since 2016. The manufacturer issued critical security patches in 2018, 2020, and 2022, none of which have been applied." She placed the image on the document camera, and it appeared on screens throughout the chamber. The photograph clearly showed an administrative screen with the outdated software version visible. "My office documented identical vulnerabilities in 57 counties across the country, including 23 in Kentucky. We've provided this full documentation to the committee, with specific recommendations for remediation." McConnell's expression had already begun to shift from dismissive to concerned. It was evident he hadn't expected this level of specific preparation, particularly involving his home state. "As for your suggestion that I'm neglecting actual problems in my district," Crockett continued, maintaining the same professional tone, "I believe secure elections are indeed an actual problem affecting every American. However, I take your broader point about district-specific issues seriously." She removed another document from her folder. "This is the Constituent Services Report from my office for the past year. We've resolved 2,342 cases involving federal benefits, housing assistance, and veteran services. We've secured $4.8 million in benefits that constituents were entitled to but had been unable to access." Crockett looked directly at McConnell. "We've also held 67 town halls and constituent service days, more than any other freshman representative. I'd be happy to provide a copy of this report for your review, Senator." The chamber had gone completely still. What made Crockett's response so powerful wasn't just the content, it was her delivery. She hadn't raised her voice or shown anger. She had simply presented facts that directly contradicted McConnell's characterization, all while maintaining perfect professionalism. McConnell, visibly recalibrating, cleared his throat. "I appreciate the Congresswoman's attention to detail, but my larger concern remains about the framing of these issues, which could undermine voter confidence." "If I may, Senator," Crockett interjected, still completely composed, "I believe we share the goal of voter confidence, which is precisely why addressing vulnerabilities is so important." She then made her most strategic move, pivoting from defense to collaboration. In fact, the documentation from Kentucky came directly from county election officials who reached out to my office after learning about our field hearings. They're seeking federal support to update their systems before the next election cycle. I've compiled their specific requests here. She held up another document. "These Republican election officials from your state have identified exactly what they need to secure their systems. They're not asking for a partisan solution. They're asking for technical assistance and resources." The dynamic had completely shifted. What had begun as an attempt to dismiss Crockett as politically motivated had transformed into a substantive policy discussion centered on McConnell's own constituents. Senator Amy Klobuchar, recognizing the significance of the moment, jumped in. "Could you tell us more about what these Kentucky election officials are specifically requesting?" This invitation allowed Crockett to detail the requests: funding for software updates, technical training for staff, physical security improvements for equipment storage, and post-election audit resources. With each specific item, she named the Kentucky county that had requested it and the estimated cost. "The total request from Kentucky counties amounts to approximately $3.8 million, Crockett noted. "That's less than 1% of what's allocated in the current bill, but it would resolve 87% of the critical vulnerabilities identified in the state." Other senators began engaging with these specifics, asking questions about similar needs in their own states. The conversation had completely transformed from a partisan exchange to a substantive policy discussion, all because Crockett had come prepared with indisputable facts rather than political talking points. Most remarkably, McConnell himself began taking notes. Those familiar with Senate dynamics recognized the significance. The minority leader was actually processing new information rather than dismissing it. His body language had shifted from confrontational to attentive. When McConnell spoke again, his tone had noticeably changed. "These county-level details are informative. I'd be interested in reviewing the full documentation for Kentucky." "I'd be happy to provide that, Senator," Crockett responded. "My office can deliver the complete Kentucky assessment to you today. We've organized it by county, with priority recommendations from your local election officials." This exchange, Crockett offering specific assistance rather than scoring political points, drew appreciative nods from several veteran senators. She had effectively demonstrated that election security wasn't a partisan issue, but a practical one that affected all constituencies. As the hearing continued, McConnell largely withdrew from aggressive questioning, occasionally consulting with an aide who appeared to be verifying Crockett's claims about Kentucky counties. The cameras caught him nodding slightly as the aide confirmed the information. By the time the chairman called a brief recess, the entire tenor of the hearing had transformed. What McConnell had likely intended as a moment to diminish Crockett's credibility had instead become a masterclass in how detailed preparation and professional response could completely reverse a power dynamic. Reporters in the gallery were already filing stories with headlines like "Congresswoman comes armed with facts in Senate showdown" and "McConnell's attack backfires as House member reveals Kentucky vulnerabilities." The political narrative was being written in real time, and it wasn't following the script McConnell had anticipated. When the committee reconvened after a 15-minute recess, attentive observers noticed an extraordinary development. McConnell had moved from his assigned seat to speak privately with his Kentucky colleague, Senator Rand Paul. Their hushed conversation, punctuated by McConnell showing Paul what appeared to be text messages on his phone, suggested urgent communication was happening behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Crockett conferred briefly with Democratic senators, who could be seen nodding appreciatively at whatever she was sharing. The power dynamics in the chamber had visibly shifted. What had begun as an attempt to dismiss a junior congresswoman had evolved into senior senators seeking her input. As questioning resumed, Chairman Lankford recognized Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Congresswoman Crockett, "I'm interested in the rural county vulnerabilities you've documented, particularly those in areas with limited technical resources. Alaska faces similar challenges with remote locations. Could you elaborate on your findings?" This question, substantive and non-partisan, reflected the hearing's transformed atmosphere. Crockett proceeded to detail specific challenges facing rural election administrators: limited IT staff, insufficient training resources, aging equipment, and connectivity issues that complicated software updates. In many rural counties, she explained, a single part-time employee might manage all election technology. When manufacturers issue security patches, these administrators often lack the technical expertise to implement them properly. "This isn't a partisan issue, it's an infrastructure and training issue." As she spoke, McConnell returned to his seat. Those watching closely noticed something remarkable. He was now taking detailed notes on Crockett's testimony, a visible indication that he was treating her information seriously rather than dismissively. The most significant moment came 40 minutes into the resumed session, when McConnell himself requested recognition from the chair. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his tone noticeably different from his earlier comment, "during the recess, I took the liberty of contacting the county clerk of Pike County to verify your assessment of their voting systems." The chamber tensed, anticipating another confrontation. Instead, McConnell continued, "The clerk confirmed that their systems are indeed running the outdated software version you identified, and that they've been requesting assistance for upgrades since 2021. A ripple of surprise moved through the gallery. McConnell was publicly acknowledging the accuracy of Crockett's information, a rare concession from the notoriously stubborn Senate leader. "Given this confirmation," McConnell continued, "I'm interested in your specific recommendations for addressing these vulnerabilities, particularly in rural counties with limited resources. What provisions in the current legislation would most directly address these concerns?" This question, substantive, detailed, and focused on solutions rather than partisan positioning, represented a complete reversal from McConnell's earlier dismissal. Crockett, recognizing the significance of the moment, responded with equal substance. "Thank you for that question, Senator McConnell. Section 304 of the current bill establishes a rural election security assistance program that would provide both funding and technical expertise to counties like Pike. The program includes 3 key provisions that would address their specific needs." She proceeded to outline these provisions: dedicated funding for software and hardware updates, technical assistance teams that would physically visit counties to implement security measures, and ongoing training resources for local election officials. These provisions were developed based on direct input from rural election administrators, Crockett noted. They're designed to be non-partisan and focused on practical implementation rather than federal control. McConnell nodded thoughtfully, a gesture that seasoned Washington observers recognized as significant. For the remainder of the hearing, the tone remained substantive and solution-oriented, with Crockett answering detailed questions from senators of both parties about specific provisions in the proposed legislation. The most telling moment came when Senator John Thune, the Republican whip, asked about implementation timelines. "Realistically, Congresswoman, how quickly could these updates be implemented if the bill passed? We're concerned about unfunded mandates and unrealistic deadlines." "That's a legitimate concern, Senator," Crockett acknowledged. "Based on our field assessments, we've developed county-by-county implementation timelines." She held up a thick binder. "This includes specific timelines for all 3,143 counties in the United States, with prioritization based on vulnerability assessments and available resources." The comprehensiveness of this preparation visibly impressed committee members. Senator Thune leaned forward. "You've assessed every county in the country?" "Yes, Senator," Crockett confirmed. My team compiled data from state election boards, security researchers, and local officials to develop a complete national assessment. We've organized it by state to make it accessible to each senator's office. This level of detailed preparation, far beyond what was typically expected from House witnesses, clearly resonated with the committee. Several senators requested copies of the assessment for their states, including McConnell, who specifically asked for the Kentucky section. As the hearing concluded, Chairman Lankford made a notable closing statement. I want to thank Congresswoman Crockett for her exceptionally thorough testimony today. The level of detailed preparation demonstrated here sets a high standard for how we should approach these critical issues. This is exactly the kind of substantive, solution-oriented discussion the American people deserve from Congress. When the gavel fell, something remarkable happened. McConnell approached Crockett directly, extending his hand. Their brief exchange wasn't captured on microphones, but those nearby reported hearing McConnell say, "Your preparation was impressive, Congresswoman. My office will be in touch about those Kentucky counties." For those familiar with Senate customs, this gesture, the senior Senate leader approaching a junior House member to acknowledge her expertise, represented an extraordinary public recognition. McConnell, known for his strategic discipline, was effectively conceding that his earlier dismissal had been mistaken. As Crockett gathered her materials, several senators from both parties approached to continue discussions about specific aspects of her testimony. The respectful attention from these senior legislators, direct access that junior representatives rarely received, demonstrated how completely she had established her authority on the subject. When she finally exited the hearing room, reporters crowded around. Rather than highlight the confrontational aspect of the exchange with McConnell, Crockett maintained her focus on substance. Today's hearing demonstrated that election security can and should be a bipartisan priority, she told the assembled press. I'm encouraged by the committee's engagement with the technical aspects of the legislation, and I look forward to working with members from both parties to strengthen our electoral infrastructure. This response, professional, solution-oriented, and devoid of personal triumph despite the clear victory, only enhanced the impression Crockett had made inside the chamber. She had not only won the exchange with McConnell, but had done so in a way that elevated the entire discussion rather than simply scoring political points. The impact of the Crockett-McConnell exchange reverberated far beyond the hearing room, creating ripple effects that would influence both election security policy and congressional dynamics for months to come. By evening, clips of the confrontation had gone viral across all platforms. Political analysts from across the spectrum weighed in, most acknowledging the exceptional nature of the exchange and Crockett's masterful handling of what could have been a derailing moment. What we witnessed today was a textbook example of how detailed preparation trumps political posturing, noted veteran political analyst Doris Kearns Goodwin on MSNBC. Congresswoman Crockett didn't just defend herself. She transformed the entire conversation by having county-specific facts that couldn't be dismissed as partisan talking points. Even conservative commentators acknowledged the effectiveness of Crockett's approach. On Fox News, former Congressman Jason Chaffetz observed, "Whatever your politics, that was a masterclass in congressional testimony." She knew McConnell's state better than he expected, and that completely changed the dynamic. There's a lesson here about the power of detailed preparation versus general talking points. Behind the scenes, the impact was even more significant. According to sources in McConnell's office who spoke anonymously to Politico, the minority leader had called an emergency meeting with his staff immediately after the hearing. He was concerned about the Kentucky vulnerabilities Crockett had identified, one aide reported. He wanted immediate verification of her claims and a briefing on what resources these counties needed. It wasn't about politics at that point. It was about legitimate security concerns in his home state. Within 48 hours, something remarkable happened. McConnell's office reached out directly to Crockett's staff, requesting a private meeting to discuss the Kentucky election security assessment in greater detail. This kind of direct outreach from Senate leadership to a junior House member was virtually unprecedented, particularly across party lines. The meeting, held in McConnell's Capitol office, lasted over an hour. According to staffers briefed on the discussion, it focused entirely on substantive policy matters, specific vulnerabilities in Kentucky's election systems, resource needs for rural counties, and implementation timelines for security upgrades. What emerged from this meeting was even more extraordinary. McConnell and Crockett issued a joint statement announcing a bipartisan working group on rural election security. While we approach many issues from different perspectives, the statement read, securing our election infrastructure is a non-partisan imperative. This working group will focus on practical solutions for rural counties facing resource constraints, with particular attention to technical assistance and training needs. This collaboration between figures representing opposite ends of the political spectrum generated significant attention. Washington Post columnist E.J. Dionne described it as a rare moment of functional government emerging from what began as typical Washington confrontation. For election officials in rural counties, the impact was immediate and tangible. The joint working group quickly arranged briefings with county clerks from Kentucky, Texas, Alaska, and other states with significant rural populations. These officials, many of whom had been requesting assistance for years, suddenly found themselves with direct access to federal policymakers. We've been raising these concerns for 3 election cycles, noted Pike County Clerk James Henderson in an interview with local Kentucky media. After Congresswoman Crockett highlighted our specific needs in that hearing, we're finally getting concrete assistance. Sometimes it takes someone putting your problems on the national radar. The legislation itself underwent significant revisions based on input from the working group. The final bill, which passed with surprising bipartisan support, included strengthened provisions for rural counties, technical assistance teams, and phased implementation timelines based on Crockett's county-by-county assessment. Most tellingly, when the bill came to the Senate floor, McConnell himself spoke in support of the rural assistance provisions. Without directly referencing his earlier confrontation with Crockett, he acknowledged the real vulnerabilities facing many counties. This legislation addresses genuine security concerns that affect communities across America, including in my home state of Kentucky, McConnell stated. After consulting directly with county election officials, I'm convinced these provisions are necessary and properly structured to respect local control while providing needed resources. For McConnell, who rarely reversed course once he had taken a position, this represented an extraordinary evolution. Political observers noted that his willingness to publicly support legislation he had initially dismissed sent a powerful signal to other Senate Republicans, 12 of whom ultimately voted for the bill's passage. For Crockett herself, the aftermath brought increased influence but no public victory lap. She continued to focus on the substance of election security rather than personalizing her victory over McConnell. When asked about the confrontation in a CNN interview, she redirected attention to the policy outcomes. What matters isn't any individual exchange, but whether we're securing our election systems effectively, she noted. I'm encouraged by the bipartisan engagement we've seen on these issues, particularly the focus on supporting our local election officials who are on the front lines of securing our democracy. This response, deflecting attention from personal triumph to substantive outcomes, only enhanced Crockett's growing reputation as a serious legislator rather than a political performer. In Washington, where viral confrontations were typically leveraged for fundraising and profile raising, this restraint stood out as particularly notable. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact emerged in congressional hearing culture itself. Committee chairs began emphasizing detailed, substantive preparation over political positioning. Several specifically cited the Crockett-McConnell exchange when instructing witnesses to focus on specific, verifiable information rather than general talking points. Senator Chris Coons captured this shift during a subsequent hearing when he told a witness who was speaking in generalities, "We're looking for Crockett-level specifics here, county by county, problem by problem, solution by solution. General assertions don't help us craft effective legislation." The phrase, Crockett-level specifics, quickly became shorthand in congressional offices for detailed, substantive preparation. Staff directors began instructing their teams to prepare witnesses with this standard in mind, focusing on verifiable facts rather than political positioning. 6 months after the viral exchange, Crockett was invited to speak at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University on effective congressional testimony. Her remarks focused not on her confrontation with McConnell, but on the importance of detailed preparation and nonpartisan framing of technical issues. In a polarized environment, specific facts are your strongest tool, she told the students. When you can provide county by county, program-by-program details rather than general assertions, you change the conversation from partisan positioning to practical problem-solving. That's when real progress becomes possible. This approach, prioritizing detailed substance over political combat, began influencing a new generation of political leaders. Several freshman representatives specifically cited Crockett's example in their approach to committee work, focusing on mastering policy details rather than generating viral moments. For McConnell, the exchange became what one aide described as an instructive moment in adapting his leadership style to changing congressional dynamics. While still a fierce partisan on many issues, he became noticeably more careful in his dismissal of testimony from witnesses with technical expertise, regardless of their political affiliation. When interviewed for a profile in The Atlantic a year after the exchange, McConnell made a rare acknowledgement of a tactical error. Without naming Crockett specifically, he noted, "In my decades in the Senate, I've learned that assuming someone lacks substantive knowledge is usually a mistake. Particularly in technical areas, it's wiser to engage with the specifics rather than dismissing the broader argument." Perhaps the most meaningful legacy emerged in how the incident influenced public service culture more broadly. The Crockett-McConnell exchange became a case study in government training programs on effective communication and conflict resolution in public policy contexts. What made Congresswoman Crockett's approach so powerful, noted public administration professor Daniel Armstrong in a widely shared analysis, wasn't just standing her ground, but doing so with specific, verifiable information rather than matching political attack with political attack. By elevating the discussion to detailed facts, she created a path for substantive collaboration that benefited all parties. As the election security legislation was implemented across the country, its impact became increasingly evident. Rural counties received targeted assistance, voting system vulnerabilities were addressed, and local election officials gained access to technical training they had long requested. These tangible improvements in election infrastructure could be traced directly to that pivotal moment when a personal attack was transformed into substantive policy discussion. Today, as we navigate increasingly complex policy challenges, the Crockett-McConnell exchange stands as a powerful reminder that the most effective response to dismissal isn't always confrontation, but rather a calm presentation of indisputable facts. It demonstrates that in an era of political performance, detailed preparation and substantive knowledge remain the most powerful tools for creating meaningful change. The exchange reminds us that sometimes the most effective way to make someone regret crossing a line isn't through escalation or public humiliation, but through demonstrating such commanding knowledge of the facts that they have no choice but to reconsider their position. In doing so, progress becomes possible even across the deepest political divides. Thank you for watching our analysis of this remarkable exchange between Senator McConnell and Congresswoman Crockett. If you found this breakdown valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of pivotal moments in American politics. Comment below with your thoughts on Crockett's approach. Have you used detailed preparation to change someone's mind in a difficult situation? Join the conversation, and we'll see you in our next video.